of the last policy committee? No. Any apologies, Keith?
Thank you, Chair. I've got a changes of membership to report as well. So this is following the changes in political balance report at the full council on the 23rd of September. So I have Councillor Richard Butler has now stood down from the committee, and Councillor Anna Callaghan has taken the additional Labour group seat, and Councillor David Martin has taken the additional independent group seat. As well as that, we also have apologies for absence today. So we have Councillor Neil Clark sends apologies for medical reasons, and Councillor Mike Adams is substituting for him. We have Councillor Dave Shaw sends apologies for medical reasons, and Councillor Elizabeth Williamson is substituting for him. Councillor Gordon Wheeler sends apologies for medical reasons. Councillor Sinead Anderson is substituting for him, and Councillor Michelle Welsh sends apologies for other reasons, and Councillor Mike Pringle is substituting for her.
Lengthy. Thank you, Keith. Helen, have we got Elizabeth? Is she on her way? No problem. Thank you very much. Any declarations of interest? No. Grand. In which case, we come to the meat of it. Agenda item 4, which is revised Nottinghamshire Fair Access Protocol. It's something we're required to have in place. It has to be consulted on with schools and others, and is a requirement in the school's admission code. It helps us to support vulnerable children's access into education. I know if I can ask Colin to perhaps speak to this report before we crack on.
Yes, thank you, Chair. The School Admission Code for 2021 came into place on the 1st of September of this year. You're right, Leader, we were required to consult, and we consulted between the 4th of August and the 19th of September. No changes other than some minor wording drafting are proposed following the consultation, and as there was majority agreement with the proposals. The protocols come here around the Children and Young People's Committee, because the next committee it would be available isn't for several weeks. Yeah, and the new arrangements have been in place from the 1st of September. Yeah, that's just to do with central government timetabling and local government timetabling not quite speaking to each other in terms of chronology. Yeah, and therefore any future fair access protocol would revert back to the Children and Young People's Committee in future years.
Thank you very much. If I got a proposer for that, is that you, Councillor Taylor?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, the recommendation is on page 8 and I move that.
Do you want to speak to it now, Tracy? Or?
I think Colin's probably covered everything that's pertinent, unless anyone has any questions.
Thank you very much. And someone second that?
Yeah, I formally second that, Leader.
Any questions on the Fair Access Protocol? Any comments or thoughts? Anne?
Yeah, just that 26 responses seems pretty low, really. And I'm just wondering if it was anything to do with between August and September for schools, which would actually say that's why you've got a low response.
Possibly. Obviously, we were given the times rather than choosing them, but I don't know if there's anything to say on that, Colin, yet.
That's why we extended the consultation till the 19th of September. Yeah. So the consultation did cover part of the schools being returned, and I agree it's a relatively low response, yeah, but probably reflects the level of excitement with regards to a fair access protocol.
Hopefully it means nobody thinks there's anything wrong with it, all being well. Any further comments? Yeah, Kate.
Just one very quick one, thank you. Just to ask really how this is actually working in schools, because I know there's been a lot of concern across in various forums that actually it is actually sometimes very difficult for some schools to take some children that have got kind of complex needs and can be kind of quite challenging in terms of their behaviour. So just be interesting at some stage. I know this kind of thing will go to Children and People's Committee, but you know, when we're presented with this, it would be nice to know actually how it's working in practice, but for the children.
Tracy or Colin, any particular thoughts?
Thank you. I think it's working insofar as it is a very strict laid down process. We know that we've got some in-year admissions collectively across the school estate, and I accept what you're saying that some children find it harder to access. But the protocol is the protocol and must be applied, so there is less, shall we say, wriggle room for schools in these situations than they might exercise in others. but we can pick that up with you if you would like some more information.
Thanks, Tracy. All right. Dave.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Paragraph 6 and 7 of the report look at consultation with stakeholders, and paragraph 6 outlines who was sent the 7 questions, including all schools of chairs and governors, registered early years providers and many others. Paragraph 7 shows that we received only 26 replies, which is quite disappointing. The only conclusion I can draw from that is it's not an issue for schools. Can you tell me how many young people have been subject to the Fair Access Protocol 2018-19 academic year, 2019-20? And are we updating this because it's a statutory requirement?
To the last one, yes, I believe so. Colin, I don't know if you have any comment on the numbers.
The answer to the last question is, as you say, Leader, it is a statutory requirement, required to do it. Yeah, we are fettered by it being in place from the 1st of September, but a decision needs to be made as soon as possible that it is agreed at a county, at the county council level, which is why it's here rather than young people's committee. I'll provide Councillor Martin outside of the meeting the data that he's asked for. Yeah, clearly you wouldn't expect me to have that up my sleeve. Yeah.
No problem. Thank you. That all right?
Yeah, it's just disappointing the lack of response you've got from.
Yes, understood. I think both the timing, as we've touched upon in terms of schools, and the significant other challenges they've got going on at the minute, but hopefully it reflects the lack of contentiousness in terms of the report and the strategy itself. It's only minor tweaks on a pre-existing document that they've all agreed on several occasions before. So, but I'm sure we'll get Colin to follow up with you in terms of numbers and access. That'd be great. Anybody else on this agenda item? Nope. Very good. All right. All in favour of that report? Thank you very much. Appears to be unanimous. Thank you very much. Agenda item 5, report of the Leader of the Council on our policy committee and our survey, initial findings. So the initial findings of our Big Not survey, you'll be aware obviously that in preparation for the council plan, we brought forward this engagement exercise. We've discussed it on several occasions previously, including this committee, to try and understand the impact of COVID, to try and understand people's priorities in terms of recovery and long-term aspirations over the next 10 years or so, what people want to see in Nottinghamshire. We've had over 12,000 responses, which from a county council perspective is far more than we've had in similar things previously. So we are obviously pleased with that and that progress, although recognise we've got further work to do in terms of growing that engagement in the future. And it's not a conversation that ends now. It's a two-way street where we now go back to those people and continue to talk to them and try and expand on that level of engagement too. There's a lot of analysis going on behind the scenes. So this document, let's say, sets out kind of preliminary findings of the survey and some of the priorities that came forward, which include particularly the environment, particularly green spaces, and obviously highways, as we've heard on many occasions before, as well as economic factors, job prospects, and job creation as well, which hopefully meets with what we've been doing and working on in terms of priorities for the administration over the last few months. We're also beginning to see, specifically from our young people's survey, that education, training, long-term job prospects are particularly important to that group of respondents as well, which again, perhaps no surprise. So from my perspective, a huge thank you to everybody who took part in the survey and who's helped to promote it. And we'll obviously continue to talk about refined data and priorities and bring forward the council plan in due course. So, Councillor Lawton, are you going to propose this report?
Yes, thank you very much, Leader. In proposing the recommendation on page 37, this is an update to allow the members of the Policy Committee to initially understand and look at the results that we have received from the Big Not survey. And it doesn't include some of the stakeholder work that we did, for example, the work we did with the parish councils quite recently at 2 separate meetings, one at County Hall, which the Chief Executive attended, and one in workshop that Derek and myself did. So as a result, there is more work ongoing as far as the Big Knot survey is concerned. It's important that I reiterate why we've gone down this route. We have gone down this route because we wanted to engage with stakeholders and members of the public in preparation for the writing and launch of the next council plan. This is by far the largest number of respondents we've ever had from any survey as far as the County Council is concerned. Whilst we would like more, we have created a toolkit so that next time we go out to engage with the public, many of the lessons learnt through this particular process have been put into a place where we can use that information and improve on our ability to be able to engage with the communities. One of the outlying issues that's come up from many of our stakeholders is lack of engagement, and it's something we will be writing into the new council plan. Without more ado, really, I will obviously respond to any questions, or Derek will. So I'll move the recommendations, Leader, on page 37.
Thank you. We should have a seconder for that.
Yeah, second the recommendation and reserve my right to speak, Leader.
Thank you, Keith. Any further points or comments, Jason?
Thanks, Ben. We spoke about this at the last meeting, and a note from the responses, as everyone said, it's now doubled to 12,000. So I congratulate you on improving those engagement figures. And I think we marked at the last meeting that there was a challenge. So I feel like we did our bit. We got our researcher doing press articles. I think we had 5, including one on your favourite radio station, Ben, Mansfield 102.3, 103.2, yeah, of course. And we put it on lots of social media and everywhere else. But even so, I think the response is still 1.5% of Nottinghamshire residents. The report says 370,000 flyers were sent. And I mentioned this at the last one. It sort of spectacularly didn't have the survey in it. And I just think that was a bonkers decision. So I guess some of the questions were, why were the 370,000 houses chosen? What about the remaining 500,000 residents? And then the costs for printing and distribution. One of my biggest concerns, of course, that only 1,047 came back from Ashfield, which is really disappointing. But if you look at your own social media and other social medias, residents told us why they didn't respond. And there were so many who just said they didn't think they were being listened to, they'd be wasting their time. County council's just too remote. They didn't feel an affinity with the county council, who made decisions in West Bridgford. Questions were too pointed and were asked to elicit the answer that the county council wanted to hear. Others struggled to access it online and only made aware when they read it on social media. And loads of people put this was a box-ticking exercise. That's on our own social media. So there's clearly a disengagement there that we've got to work on. And there's clearly also a link between deprivation, poorer areas, and poor response rates. And also, the further residents are from County Hall, the less likely they have been to take part. And I think that emphasises the point we've been making a lot about remoteness. And then I've got another question about, have we got any of the stats about how many council staff took part in the response, and how many of those staff then also were county residents? And I guess none of us are surprised that roads and pavements are the #1 issue. But given the assertions you've made to us in this chamber, do you think it's been a success? I hope it wasn't a box-ticking exercise, but do you think it's £100,000 well spent for 12,000 responses, Ben?
Thanks, Jason. I think that's all very fair commentary. I'll ask Derek to come in a minute on some of the specifics, particularly around the survey being sent in the post, why we chose the audience and that element of it, as well as council staff responses. That would be really helpful. I think your points on engagement are bang on, and we've had the same conversation this morning around both the demographic imbalance in terms of level of responses, and also that geography in terms of it's the furthest away places. We've certainly heard that feedback before, and you're right, I've seen that on social media, on my own pages, about why should I bother, which is upsetting in many ways, and it's clearly a long-term relationship we need to rebuild with the public. I think we've talked about in here before some of the challenges from a county council perspective of many of our services being hidden. People see that the bulk of their council tax goes to County Hall, but they're not necessarily engaged with children's services or social care services or many of the things that we do day to day that actually eat up the bulk of that funding. So we've clearly got a much bigger piece of work to do around how we build that relationship with communities. I think I said in the kind of preamble, one of the challenges for officers is now to build that two-way conversation and make sure we feed back to residents what it is we're doing with this information, how it feeds into council plan, and kind of, you said we did type scenario, and make sure that it is clear that we are using this for the right purposes. And similarly, conversations with comms colleagues about how we promote and show what our services do on a day-to-day basis, because actually we've got, as we've said, full council recently, many staff working in really challenging scenarios, doing great work in our communities for vulnerable people in particular, that isn't always seen or recognised. So I think that's a huge challenge for us as well. In terms of value for money, I think I hope so. There's a lot of learning to come from it. As Bruce says, we put together a bit of a toolkit in terms of how we take this forward in future, so that we don't need to pay external people, and we don't need to perhaps accrue as much cost in future iterations of this. And we should learn from some of the feedback from people like yourself about particularly posting things out and cost of all of that. There's more engagement to be done. I think, as I say, as we grow the audience, and particularly as we can start to build that relationship, get more people signed up on emails and free forms of communication and discussion as well, that will help us to save costs, I hope. Derek, I don't know if you're able to come back, as I say, on those particular points about how we chose that audience, and particularly around council staff.
Absolutely. So in terms of the 370,000 households that we distributed the survey details to, but that's all of the households in the county. So we didn't select some households and not others. That's every residential postal address in the county. So that went to every house. As far as the question around why we didn't circulate the actual survey, the costs involved in doing that would have been much more significant than the costs of circulating the online details to residents, and it would also have involved a significant piece of work then in getting back postal, via post, actual paper surveys and paper copies. So the collection of that, the analysis of that would have been both very time consuming, resource intensive and extremely expensive, which is the reason why we didn't choose that method and instead signposted residents to the online survey. In terms of council staff participants, I'll have to check, but I don't think we collected that information. What we did collect was the postcodes of every online response, so we're able to identify the postcodes of anybody who responded that wasn't resident in the county.
Thanks, Derek. I think it's worth saying in terms of outcomes, the intention is for this to be very clear when we bring forward the council plan as to how that's fed in. And the thing that's rewarding, I suppose, from the administration's perspective is the key things that have come forward in that survey are the key things that we'd kind of picked out in terms of challenges and things to work on. So we need to make sure that we are feeding that in and communicating that back. But a good first step, I think, from that perspective. I've got Jim next.
Yeah, just to say again, actually, welcome the plan. It's actually shown some strengths and some weaknesses as well. On that particular instance, on chart number 6, the responses received by the various districts. This as a whole is actually an amalgamation of all 7 districts. So all the answers are an amalgamation. It would be nice to see, for pure argument's sake, these questions. But for Gedling, did they respond differently to Bassett Law, for argument's sake? So we've actually got the amalgamation. It would be actually useful to see how different districts, for instance, the lower level ones, the one chart above it, self-employed 3%. I would have thought, just in general terms, that would be higher. But as a pure guess, would that be all from Rushcliffe and nothing from Gedling or Mansfield, for argument's sake? So particularly with the lower one, it would be extremely useful. As has already been said by Councillor Lawson, to use it as a toolkit, there's no use using it as a toolkit kit in this form, it has to be actually tailored to each district anyway. So it'll be useful seeing it. Thank you.
Thanks, Jim. Worth saying, I mean, obviously there's more work done in the background in terms of collating all of that. That's the figure I've asked for as well, because there's no sense of sitting here and pretending that West Bridgford is the same as Retford. It's probably not, and I would imagine the priorities are slightly different as well. But as far as I understand, we're on with that, Derek, are we? Yep. Anything further to add to that? Or?
Thanks, Lee. The only thing I'd add further to that is that in addition to the open online survey, which is the data and detail you've got in front of you, we've also undertaken a face-to-face survey of about 1,000 residents as well, which is balanced and statistically valid in terms of geography, age, demographics, etc. That will also be interesting to members. That piece of that analysis is currently happening, and we'll obviously be in a position to share that with members in due course as well. And that the early look that we've had at that data indicates that the outcomes are ever so slightly different from the open online survey, and that reflects the different age profiles of the responses. But we'll be in a position to pull that together and share that with members in the relatively near future.
Thanks, Derek. Anne.
Well, I think we've already answered about the most deprived areas having the lowest response rate. But what I'd like to know is how will the survey or the plan going forward integrate with other NOTS partners, especially the voluntary sector, because the voluntary sector does a lot more than what it's sometimes given credit for.
Derek?
Thank you for the question. So one of the engagement piece of work that we've undertaken over the last few months, but we're still pulling the piece of that together, and Councillor Lawton referred to it, is engagement with partners, and that's included our voluntary and community sector partners as well. We've also looking to establish a more kind of strategic relationship with our voluntary partners as well, particularly the kind of community infrastructure organisations that exist around the county. So we'd be hopeful at this point that the council plan will intersect with the interests and priorities of our voluntary and community partners, because that's the feedback that we've got thus far. It's been relatively positive, but there is an opportunity and I think a challenge for us to develop a more strategic relationship with some of our key partners.
Thanks, Derek. Worth saying that there's obviously, everyone will know there's a huge piece of work going on, particularly with district colleagues at the minute in terms of that collaboration and joining up services, and the survey and the plan can no doubt feed into those relationships too in terms of the priorities we take forward through the Economic Prosperity Committee as well. Mike.
Thanks, Chairman. Firstly, let's recognise the effort that's gone into this survey, and thanks, Derek, for the briefings, updates, and to Councillor Lawton for being open and transparent with where he was and what was expecting. So I think that's really positive. Some of the issues that raise its head again from the areas and the deprivation side, and on both sides, to be honest. It'd be nice to see how that translates in future. But I think it pulls up some really important health issues, which I'm not sure how involved we can get at the end of the day, but I think it's important that we recognise this and work with partners within the health service to address them best we can, as councillors as well as a full council. And I think, as Anne pointed out, the voluntary sector, I think we've already approved a catalogue to come together of voluntary services that I think we might have done it a policy some time ago. To collate the voluntary services that we have in that, because I think a lot of that service will apply to the, certainly to the questions and the ability to deliver responses, even if it's to return responses back for future development, I think. So I recognise that this is a note-in at point one, and the add-ons, having read it, would be to look at the health service in particular and the voluntary service further than what we are. So thank you for that.
Thanks, Mike. Appreciate those comments. Worth saying on the health front, I think I'm meeting the chair of the Integrated Care system, service, whichever one it is, system, all these acronyms, in the next couple of weeks to talk through exactly that and how we can tie these things together. I think particularly when you look at our challenges, both in terms of service delivery and budgets, obviously health is a huge priority here, but also for us financially as well. There's a lot of work we need to do with the ICS to join things up with the NHS, both in terms of social care, but also in terms of what proactive interventions we can draw out from them and trying to get them more engaged in that early intervention side of things. That's certainly a priority for us. So big piece of work to do with them, but we're going to have fun.
Yeah, and if I can, I think that's really important, the early intervention and the early years efforts that go into it. I think that's highlighted within the paper, and I think that's come out. So it'd be really positive to get any results out there, to be quite honest. Thank you.
And just to note, Councillor Pringle, that we had an approach from Healthwatch via Alan Rhodes, actually, who now works for Healthwatch, to ask if we would share the findings with Healthwatch. And for colleagues who aren't familiar with what they do, they are an advocate for patients in the health system, and we've agreed to share the findings. So as well as sharing the findings with the commissioners in the system, we're also going to share the findings with those that advocate for patients.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I think we should take some comfort from this report so far. I think a return of 12,000 is pretty good. I know if you turn it into percentage figures, then it's very easy to say, well, it's not a high percentage. But in absolute terms of 12,000, that, I think, for a survey, a consultation exercise, is extremely good. And those that organised it ought to be thanked for so doing. And I note the points that have been made that a number of people are saying on social media, oh, it's not worth responding. There's no point in it. I hear that. I've heard that so many times. Well, if you don't respond, then you're not going to have any input at all. That's the top and bottom of it. But I think if you want to take a message going forward, what we need to ensure when we come to formulate the final plan is that what has been said to us is actually appropriately incorporated in that plan to make sure that those that have taken the trouble to respond have been listened to and action is being taken. In that way, you make these sort of surveys more meaningful. I think to some extent we're all a bit cynical about surveys, particularly when it comes to surveys and consultations on the budget. Because if you ask the question, do you want your council tax to go up? Everybody says no. And then it goes up. So what's the point of so we know that. But I think in this case we have a real opportunity to show that it has been worthwhile consulting and responding. The issue of remoteness versus engagement is an interesting one. When people say all the decisions are taken at West Bridgford at County Hall, well, we could equally stand in the middle of Mansfield Marketplace and have a meeting, I suppose. It's just convenient that we've got a building here. That's why the actual decisions are taken here. But what it boils down to really is that we, as all of us as elected members, are the face of the county council in our own areas. And if people are feeling remote from the county council, are there not questions that we as elected members need to be asking of ourselves? Are we being remote? And I regard myself as not being remote in my division, and people can get hold of me quite easily. And so, in that sense, the county council, through me, is not remote. I just want to look at one particular point on page 36, the Big Knots Business Survey, paragraph 13. I think there's some encouraging comments there at the end of paragraph 13. I note that businesses responding 21% were pessimistic about the future, but that does mean, and we never seem to take the positive side, that 79% weren't pessimistic about the future. They're looking for, they see a future. And I think that's the message that we need to get out. There's been far too much doom and gloom. Yeah, 21% are pessimistic, but 79% are not. And I think that is an important message, and I think it provides a strong base for businesses and for the whole community of Nottinghamshire going forward as we move out of this pandemic. So I think the survey is interesting. Those that have organised it need to take credit for the returns that we've got, but we as elected members have got to ensure that those priorities, those comments, those ideas, those suggestions are enacted when we put together the final plan.
Thanks, Philip. Very sound, as ever. You're right. I think there's some interesting figures in here, both from business and from the wider public, about we often focus quite understandably on some of the challenges and some of the more negative stuff, but business has not been hit so far to the extent that some of us had predicted. There's a lot of optimism out there. There's a lot of investment going on and lots of opportunities from that point of view, and that's reflected in here. Similarly, I think it's around 40% of residents said they actually felt financially better off and had saved money, and there's opportunities for them to go out and spend and to help to grow our economy similarly. So good stuff to take from that too. I think the key point on figures, and you're right, is a good number, I think. And the key thing is that it's statistically significant in that we can therefore use that data in a meaningful way to impact on what we do. And part of that bit about being remote is us building that relationship, going back and making sure we engage with people and show that it is feeding into the survey, and we get that feedback back to them, and maybe they'll be less cynical about it next time. But you're right, of course, that if you don't take part, then you don't get a say from that perspective. Also correct that as members, we are all the county council, not just the administration, so not just the leadership either. So we've all got that responsibility to give that feedback and to put ourselves out there. And I'm glad you do such a fantastic job, Philip, and many others could follow in your footsteps, I'm sure. So I'm sure we all take that responsibility on board when it comes to feeding all of this back as well. Is there anything to add to that, Bruce, do you think? Or are you happy? Yeah, no, good. I'm good. Happy enough. Good, good. Right. Kate.
Sorry, I was listening. So, okay, just a couple of things. I mean, I think, first to say thanks to Derek and to Bruce. Clearly, you're trying really hard at this, and I'll give you credit for that. But it is difficult. And I still think there is more we can do, both as individual members and kind of to get out there. I mean, and I think that the remoteness and the deprivation thing is a really big thing that really we need to tackle. I mean, I just did a little bit of digging yesterday, and the Bassetlaw population of 118,000 is roughly similar to the Rushcliffe one of 121,000. And the children living in out-of-work families in Bassetlaw was 3,000, which is 13%. And in Rushcliffe, it was 1,500, which is 7%. So you've got that issue of both remoteness and, I suspect, deprivation running together there. And I heard Bruce say you've been out to workshop, which is great. And I think that digging down qualitative type stuff is actually very powerful, and it actually triangulates really well with some of the stuff that's coming in. And I think we need to do more of that, really, because I just really do worry here that actually this is not representative. And it can't be, can it, with 12,000? And how do we know? Have you broken down the data in terms of representative groups? And I see you've done it in terms of gender and the obvious ones, but have we done it in terms, say, for example, of kind of income, those kinds of things? So I think really, I know that resources are tight and you're doing really, really best. I think there's more we can do. Just on the waiting thing as well, because yes, you take the survey and you say, okay, this is what people want, but the kind of people that actually need our help the most might not be responding, either because they can't or they see it as irrelevant and they feel disengaged in it. Just to pick out one, and this is just random, I mean, you can pick out loads. If you look at the paragraph, recovery challenges, opportunities on the yellow pages, it's 43. The mental health concern actually features quite low down there. And yet on Monday I was in a voluntary sector organisation. I think at that point it was very well made in terms of the voluntary sector that does early intervention, early help with mental health people. And their referrals, they've gone absolutely through the roof. They're on the knees. And they've got a mental health team from the local authority working in the same building, and they're in the same pot. So, I think it's great that the people that have responded, but you know, but we have to hear what are now called kind of the seldom heard people as well, and really try hard to go out and find them. And I think most of us here will be very happy to do that. Probably all of us would, and I'm very happy to do that. The other thing as well I was going to say, I know we talked in depth about the wonderful response and the community hub, the response to the pandemic. Surely there's data there we can feed into this, in terms of what people want, what people need. There's our casework, and I keep banging on about this. I mean, everybody's casework, if we did a proper kind of survey and analysis of what our casework is, I think that would be fantastic. That's what actually we're doing out there, and the kind of things that Philip was talking about. You know, we'll see then actually what it is that people really want us to do, apart from kind of filling in potholes. You know, there is more than that to it. So I think it's good that you see it as an iterative process. It's good that you're trying really hard. I do think there's really more that we could do to make sure that actually we're listening properly to everybody in this county, regardless of where they live and who they are and what their particular problems are at the moment.
Yeah, thanks, Kate. Fair point. I think I'll ask you to come in a second, Derek, if that's all right, on the community hub and casework analysis point. I'd pick out some practical challenges in terms of the casework one, and just in terms of collating it all, but I'm sure it's something we could look at and what's feasible. Would probably require all of us to feed that information in proactively if we were going to do something like that. But perhaps, Derek, you pick up on that one for me in a second. I think, I mean, it's always clear, I think, that the people most in need of support are the hardest ones to reach, and that's the case in all sorts of sectors. I think, obviously, between that and some of the other points you made, worth saying that this isn't the only thing that feeds into those streams of work, into priorities and into service delivery. Obviously, we'll take the data that exists in terms of need, and we'll take all sorts of other elements into account in terms of priority setting too. I think the thing that does, as I said, look positive to me is that the priorities we've picked out in terms of the council plan from our end seem to match up with the priorities that have come in from residents, which I think is a good thing. But in terms of that data breakdown, I think we've touched on, absolutely right. We need to know, which bits of the county are prioritising which things, rather than just look at this in the round. I think in the same way that you can't always look at general election polling and say there's no such thing as a national swing anymore. It's different in different places and demographics, isn't it? I think the same is true for this data. So I know that Derek and his team are doing that work in the background to try and break that down in a way that makes it practically useful for us in terms of service delivery and support as well. I don't know if you had any comments on the data points, Derek, there.
Thank you, and thank you for the question, Councillor Folt. As far as the kind of weighting of the data that's presented in the report this morning is concerned, as I mentioned in a previous answer, we've also undertaken a properly statistically valid face-to-face survey of 1,100 residents. The early indications from that piece of research, which augments the open survey, is that the weightings of responses are coming back slightly differently, and that reflects a different age demographic and a slightly different social demographic, because it's statistically balanced, and that does reflect a slight increase in concern and aspiration around and priorities around employment, skills, and funnily enough, mental health as well. So as we pull things together, both pieces of the survey work together, we'll be able to present that to members and of course incorporate that in the council plan. As far as the community hub is concerned, every single organisation that's part of the community hub and signed up to the community hub has been given the opportunity to engage in and contribute to our voluntary and community sector engagement work, and we've gathered a lot of views and perspectives from that. And we've discussed separately, of course, you and I, the issue around casework, and it's absolutely a good point, well made. I think the challenge for us is how we find a way to practically collate, and then sift that kind of information. But that is something that we're aware of from an officer perspective, and there is some thinking going on about how we can pull together kind of support for members around casework.
Thanks, Derek. I think Anthony might have had a thought on that one.
Well, yes, just a random thought, but it might give us a straw poll. We could, through Marge and Keith, work with the group research officers just to do a high-level summary of what you're seeing coming through on casework, because the themes, I'm sure, will be very similar to what we've seen through the wider research. Maybe your colleagues could collect it, your business managers could cast their eye over it, and then we'll just see it as that, fairly high level and informal, in lieu of us implementing a proper case recording system, which I know Marge has got in prototype and we want to do as soon as we can. But no reason why we can't do that quick and dirty piece of work just to get those things into the plan. We'll need to do it swiftly, but Marge and Keith, I'm sure, will be happy to do that.
Great, we'll take that away and work on that. Tracy.
Thank you, Chair. Partly picking up on what Councillor Foles said, and Bruce has also commented on the attendance at the workshop session as an example, because obviously I'm a Bassett Law councillor. I am disappointed in the level of responses. I believe I've worked quite hard to engage with my communities, and taking Philip's point, I have 17 parishes. I know I'm not the top scorer. I think there are councillors who have more. But at each of those parish councils, and I do attend regularly, I have not only told them about the survey, encouraged them to participate, share it through their media channels, told them about the event in Worksop, and been very clear that they complain that things always happen in County Hall, and I have made a lot of noise to make it happen locally. I had one representative from one of my parish councils attend, so you can imagine how much of a failure I feel in the moment at not having encouraged more response, which means I've got more work to do as much as anything else. I will keep doing that. I don't know how else to draw people in. It is not for the want of trying, I would say, and I suspect most of the people in this room would share that view also. I don't think there's anybody in here who has not tried, and I don't know how to make horses drink, for want of a better expression. But yes, it is disappointing, and I suppose the approach I'm taking now with my parishes is the consultation may have closed, but the conversations haven't, and the feedback continues. And to give you a very quick response to your straw poll, Anthony, the biggest volume of work I have in my casework is about speeding traffic, and I'm really not sure how that is or will be in my gift to fix.
Yes, that's a point worth bearing in mind, that not everything that comes through to us is necessarily for us from that perspective. If I look at my parliamentary inbox, I imagine only a very tiny proportion of it is actually related to the government most of the time, or national government anyway. So I have to bear that in mind too. I don't think anyone doubts your veracity in terms of trying to pull people together on a local level, Tracy, but clearly work we've got to do to try and build that relationship and trust as well, for as all of us and as organisation too. Glyn.
Thank you, Leader. I think I was disappointed more in the business community and the fact that the number of responses there, because I would have thought that you and I know some of the work that Keith's been doing and various other people talking to the business communities, that we would have had a better response from them in total, especially with the work that we've done over a number of years with the business community and the grants that we have worked with them to either get or given them from our resources. So in that sense, I'm a little bit disappointed. I thank Derek again for his commentary earlier and about some of the way forward, and that's what I would like to sort of focus on it. One of that is with partners, because quite clearly, as I said, some of the things aren't in our gift, or maybe a proportion of it, and speeding traffic is one. Yeah, we might be able to put traffic calming in, we may not be able to put it in. It might be that what we just want is a police officer with a speed gun or someone there, but it's that working in partnership to get them to do that. But the other bit is probably going back to someone saying that we're all in this together, and we're all ambassadors for Nottinghamshire County Council. Well, what I want to know is where will not just us in this committee see the data and probably have an input into the plan, where will other members who don't sit on this committee? Have you thought about, once you've got all that data together, of having somewhere where we can have a contribution and look at what the outcomes are and work with you on those priorities, so that we actually do own it, So it's not just something that we can knock you about in here and in council chamber over, but actually it's about real ownership, and that it's done so we can have that input, and if we disagree on something, we can do it before it's published, as opposed to waiting and getting something that says, yeah, that's the plan, and whether you're going to do that. So that's why I would want to see some inclusive work on it.
Go on then, Bruce.
Derek is aware that we want you to have a look at the first draft of the plan. Do you know what I mean? To have your input in it, so that you can say what you think, and we can take that on board. So we are going to be engaging with you, and we are continuing to engage with you on this issue.
Thanks, Bruce. I think from my perspective, Glyn, it'd be good to pull that conversation together. I hope we've made a point so far on this administration of on all sorts of issues, being able to have those conversations and figure out who wants what and how we make it work before we get to this forum. And as you say, not have it as a political battle when we get here. And that's definitely the way I'd like to approach this as well. So I'm sure Derek and Bruce will build that into the system. I don't know if there's any comment, Derek, on the business element. I'd imagine we've had contact from the larger umbrella organisations, have we, from that perspective?
Yes, absolutely. We've had, we've made a significant effort to engage through our economic development colleagues with the business community, and near on 200 responses I think represents a reasonable response, and that of course incorporates some of the umbrella organisations from a business perspective as well.
Thanks, Derek. Keith.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I don't think we should beat ourselves up about the number, to be fair. You know, it's like anything. We have percentages and we have numbers, and as Philip said, in terms of putting out the negative rather than the positive, I think that the thing behind that is we need to look at what the negatives are so we can deal with them. So I can understand why we do that. But if you look at, for example, the amount of young people that engaged, if you do it as a percentage, it's really poor. However, to get 809 young people to engage in our survey is incredible. It's absolutely incredible, so you know, let's not beat ourselves up about that. And I think there's also an element of, you know, why bother? Why you don't listen anyway, right? So we can say that, but everybody has a responsibility in that, including the districts, including the boroughs, because a lot of people don't see it as the county council; they see it as the council. So if their districts and boroughs aren't performing and they're not happy with it, then the likelihood is they're going to consider us as part of that, and Vicky Verka as well. So if we're not performing well, you know, because I get emails sometimes when I'm being shouted at, and it's absolutely nothing to do with me, but you have to take it on the chin as a councillor. So I don't think we should beat ourselves up over it. And I don't run my being a councillor by social media comments, unlike I know some do, because it tends to be lazy comments. Oh, what's the point in doing that, when actually they'd have to think and they'd have to answer questions if they filled a survey in. And it's easier just to say it's not much point doing it, because look at me, I know what I'm talking about because I'm on Facebook. Yeah, so to me, I think we should look at the people that have bothered to respond, because again, you know, most people only respond if our services actually impact on them. Most people actually, and this is my angle on it, might actually be content. You know, what's the point in me actually commenting, because it's going all right. Nothing I need. I'm getting on with my life because I'm not having to engage in any of the services that the council give, apart from when my bin isn't emptied, or the roads aren't very good, or there's somebody speeding, or they're going to build somewhere where they don't want to build. And we all see the reaction of things like that when it's something that's going to be taken away or something that's going to be done that they don't want. Yeah, so if we'd have put in our survey, right, we're thinking of getting rid of libraries, I can tell you now, we'd have had thousands and thousands and thousands of responses about that. So maybe we need to put something in that will make them comment, and then say, well, no, we was only joking. We're not going to get rid of the libraries. We just needed to have your responses. So there's different ways of looking at it. I think it's been a good survey in terms of that. I think we've got some really good answers. We're getting a trend, you know, because you're seeing it. You know, COVID's a big thing at the moment, so a lot of people have commented on COVID. You know, the green agenda is a big thing, but we'll have some other trend will come through which will be then a priority for those people. And it's down to us as the council to look at those trends, to see how we can respond to them and how we can react to them. And this is all about finding out what we need to do to help the people out there. And I think it's a good survey because of that. And I think the people that's been responsible for putting that survey out, it should be congratulated. And I'd like to take some credit, because I was in Ashfield and gave the surveys out at the Veterans Breakfast, and I've told them all to answer. So in Ashfield's figures, I'm sure some of them will be veterans. Thank you.
Thanks, Keith. You take full credit for both of those people in Ashfield that you managed to convince. Look, I think that's absolutely right. I think there's a lot of positives to come out of this, and personally, to pick up on firstly worth saying that we're not shutting any libraries before that leaks out of this room. There are no libraries to be closed. I thought you would be. Yeah, no, I knew that. But on your point, I think that there's a lot to be said. Speaking as a small C Conservative person who fundamentally believes that most people want the government to butt out of their lives and leave them alone, that there's a huge proportion of people that probably are just getting on with it. And unless they engage with our services, they haven't got a great deal to say about it. But important that we manage the data that we've got and that we use it in a positive way. I'd come to Keith as the seconder and at the end, Dave, but you've stuck your hand up and you can squeeze in if you want to. I'll allow it. Did you? I missed you earlier on. Apologies. Go on.
I thought it was very well presented, the survey, and I completely agree with the aspiration to do it online, although I received paper copies which I took out to my libraries in Selsdon Parish and to the Parish Council and the Parish Council network, because I know, because I'm on 2 parish councils, and both of those received the survey, and it's no shock to find out that roads is the top priority, and it's quite clear, it doesn't take rocket science to work that out. I mean, when we sent out a survey in Ashfield last year, with 125,000 people, we got 15,000 responses over highways. So when you talk to people about things that they're interested in, and I'll give you another typical example. When we did the neighbourhood plan, we sent out 5,500 leaflets, and we got 50 responses until that laminated leaflet went on the telegraph pole saying we're building 200 houses here. And then we were inundated. So it's how we ask the question. It's how we ask the question. And I think probably the problem with some of the survey was it was a little bit ambiguous and a bit leading on the questions. So if you talked about, we could actually talk in the next survey about what the County Council actually already does, because it does a massive amount of work already, especially in mental health. And I'll bring the point that Health Watch haven't been to a health scrutiny meeting for the last four months. They've not been. And yet they're one of the major players in the county in that respect. And it also, as well, 20% of residents wanted better cultural and leisure facilities, and yet County Council managed assets across Mansfield and Ashfield have had them frozen as a result of COVID. So if we talked about leisure and cultural facilities more local to their areas, like the Two Counties Trust are stemming sport across Mansfield and Ashfield because they own assets across those 2 areas. And, it's no surprise that people aren't engaging it, because some of the questions are just not interesting enough for that local area. If you talked about mental health in the survey, you probably get more response. And when we talk about community safety, speeding's another one that would draw responses, even though we have little control of it, because it's more to do with the police. But they seem to have abandoned parking and speeding since 2015, when the numbers went down to such a low level. But like the other subject when we talk about health is the fact that 40% of residents can't get an appointment with a GP. And if we'd have put something in like that, how many times do you get to see a GP, you'd probably have had more response, because it's more personal to them, and especially during COVID. You've had a good response, but if the questions were a bit more innovative, then you'd probably get a higher response.
Thanks, Dave. Understand your point totally. And it's worth saying a lot of work going on digging into primary care and GPs, etc., through health scrutiny and wherever, as you pointed out. In terms of the point on questions, I almost backed up what Keith said in terms of residents responding when it's something that affects them and engages them, or where they've got something to moan about from that perspective. I think you're right. And one of the things I picked up early doors, and I've already kind of fed in, is exactly that I think at future iterations of this, we need to have it on a kind of thematic level. I think people are more likely to click the link if it says talk to us about potholes on your street than they are if it says fill in our survey, and that's a point I've already made to officers and hopefully will be taken forward. Picking up on the Two Counties Trust work, obviously that affects my own division in constituency 2 at Manor, and it's something I met the Two Counties Trust fortnight ago, working with them on some options, and I've asked officers here to meet with them as well and just see if we can broker some support to try and get as much of that back open as possible, because I recognise that's a real challenge in my own patch as well as in Ashfield. Right. Bruce, do you want to summarise?
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you very much, everybody, for their input. There's a few points and a few points of clarification, really, as far as the Big Knot survey is concerned. First of all, it was a small team that has done this work, a very small team, in fact, and they worked extremely hard. And so thank you for all your thanks to that team, and Derek will pass on that on to them. Philip, just a quick one. Yes, it does doubles up and will be incorporated in the plan, the information which we've gathered over the period. David, we've formulated the survey, and it's extremely difficult doing these sort of things because you have to gather some base information on the individuals that you are collecting the information from. So you can't actually go straight into the meat of what you're trying to gather straight away. You've got to do that initial questioning of the individual to ensure you can understand the demographics and why they're making the comments they are doing. So as a result, surveys inevitably are going to be a little bit generic at the beginning, and it's therefore more difficult to drill down onto those real subjects that you're trying to gather information on, to be able to specifically give us a steer as far as the plan is concerned. And that sort of puts into the context where we are as a council, the changes that have gone on with the new leadership, and our thought processes on engaging with individuals and giving them the opportunity to have a feed-in to our policy making. So that's where we are with that. But I do reiterate that this survey is a snapshot in time, you know, and that we need to make sure that is taken into account. Jason, you asked with reference to costs. It cost £27,000 to put the leaflet through the door, which roughly runs at about 8p each, and that's including delivery. So it was really quite good value for money. But you did ask that question, and that was what the figure is on that one. A number of you, including Philip again, communication, and communication is key as far as we're concerned. It came over large when we were actually talking to stakeholders, you know, and so it is something again that we'll be writing into the plan as a major action, really, that we actually get out there and start talking to people, and we talk to people and we engage with people properly and effectively, and that's, because I think for too long we have not done that, and we need to improve. And it was actually quite, you could pick up when we were meeting with the county council, and I shan't mention names, but you could pick up those communities where the county councillor was engaging with those communities. Where the county councillor was engaging with their communities, they had a completely different attitude towards engaging with us in the actual forum. So that was really quite interesting. And I was picking up specifics, like, I will mention a name, one of Mike's parishes came to me. My council has been trying to sort this out and has not been able to sort it out for, you know what I mean? And so I got in touch with Mike, and we dealt with the issue, and the issue has been actually been dealt with. But that gives you a flavour of where we are with that. And I'll come on to you now, Mike. You mentioned about dovetailing the plan with health. Councillor Doddy has been an integral part. Of looking at the surveys, and also in the engaging with the writing of the plan. We're acutely aware how important health is, and can I say, mental health, Kate, nobody's more aware of mental health than me, if you see where I'm coming from. And so as a result, we will ensure that we already have done, actually. We've already spoken to Derek about it, and it is one of cornerstones of the health issues which are coming through as far as the plan is concerned. Recognising that we have to work with partners. We can't deliver it on our own, and we have to work with partners to be able to deliver that, and that the plan will be a part of that. And as I've already pointed out, then my last point really is we will be engaging with you before that plan goes live. Before that plan gets, you put it this way, the first time you see it will not be in the full council papers. Okay, you will have an input into it. Okay, thank you very much.
Fab, thanks Bruce. Neatly summarised. Right, I think that draws us to the end of that particular piece. So I'll just ask for all in favour of approval of that report. Thank you very much. Unanimous again, I think. Right, agenda item 6. So the purpose of this report is to seek approval for a partnership submission to BEIS about the Social Housing Decarbonisation Fund. Adrian, I'm going to ask you to just fill us in, or is it Derek, Matt on this one? One of you. Brill, thank you.
Thank you, Leader. So the report itself highlights the bid that we're due to make to BEIS for Wave 1 funding. Hopefully you all remember that we brought a paper to this committee in December last year around the Social Housing Decarbonisation Fund, with which we were successful, one of only 17 councils in the country. The report outlines the next steps in the process. We have the opportunity to bid for a further wave of funding. This won't be the only wave. There'll be further waves as we move forward, and the report talks about how we might deal with that with other councils moving forward and other districts. So the report asks, and the recommendations are contained within the report, obviously for us to submit a bid, and gives a bit of an update on our Social Housing Decarbonisation Fund programme.
Thanks, Matt. So in terms of proposing and seconding, are you happy to propose that one, Keith?
Yes, Chairman. I propose the recommendations on page 47, and just really say that, as has been indicated, this is another wave, of which there will be more. We're pretty much prescribed who can be in that wave, but so I think it's a no-brainer. We've got to get on with it and do it, and hopefully we're successful.
Thanks, Keith. Have I got a seconder for that? Thanks, Richard. I had a question in the first instance, Matt. I don't know if you can answer this, but it was something we discussed this morning, just really as to, obviously, district council, housing authorities, and just why it's here as opposed to there from that perspective.
Thank you, Leader. So we have obviously got a very good relationship with Mansfield and Bassetlaw through the original Social Housing Fund. Given the timetable for which we were needed to actually submit a bid, and obviously have our knowledge of the existing stock in those areas, we were able to pull a bid at fairly short notice, which was a kind of a prescribed timetable. Going forward, we'll obviously now work with colleagues. Now we know there is a pipeline of funding to obviously develop bids in other areas where they want to work with us.
So to add to that, and it's ARC that will be doing that work. So obviously they're our arm's length company, so it's probably best that we're part of the funding of it all.
Well, thank you for clarifying that. I point out, so there's a public report here and there's an exempt appendix which we may or may not feel the need to go on to, but if anyone's got any particular comments at this point, please keep them to the public document. Has anyone got anything? Helen?
Just, yeah. So just on the actual public document on paragraph 3, it does say 25 houses, and other documents elsewhere says a different number. So I just want clarification. I'm not quite sure how I should mention it or not.
Matt, have you got any clues on that one?
Yeah, I'll be honest, I think it is a genuine mistake. We were working at pace to provide the exempt appendix, so apologies, colleagues. It should reflect the number of properties that are in the exempt appendix.
And given that it was meant to be published in the public document, can you tell us what that number is? (26).
26.
Thank you very much. Helen.
Yeah, thank you. Just really quick, I appreciate that the government are providing the funding for the 38,000 homes across the country with their 160 million scheme, but prioritising social housing, Bassetlaw and Mansfield, it will, according to the government's own figures, lead to our poorest residents in other areas like Ashfield paying more a year on their energy bills. They're already going through the roof, as we all know. Can I ask whether we are confident that this, I know there is going to be a second wave, but are we confident that it's going to be rolled out to everybody else in the county, or is the second wave going to be specific areas as well?
Matt?
We are already in discussion with other districts and boroughs around their plans, so we would want to obviously work with colleagues in Ashfield as well around that, and I've already started a conversation with is it Paul in Ashfield, just to obviously make him aware of this initiative as well.
Great, thanks. Well, certainly our intention, although we are obviously bidding to a government fund from that perspective, so as much control as we've got over that. Are there any comments on the public document? I'm broadly happy. All right, in that case, anything, Richard, from you in summary? Happy enough? Brill. All in favour of that report? Thank you very much. We'll touch on the work programme before we have a look at whether we need to move on to that exempt element. As you know, trying not to duplicate decisions that are taken already in other committees, which does slim down this agenda somewhat, but we've got lots of floating external things, particularly regional economic elements that, as you know, are priorities as an administration that we intend to bring back and report on in due course to this committee. So some flexibility there is helpful because we're in many cases in government's hands in terms of dates of announcements and things like that. But we've got obviously Freeport and highways review among other things to come. Has anyone got any further comments on the work programme? David?
Yeah, I think it was either March or April. I asked about a review for secondary school education in the Hucknall planning area. Has that gone to another committee, or is it for policy to look at that?
Don't know the answer to that, but we'll find out. If it's been raised, I would hope it's been taken up, but we can check.
Yeah, sorry, Councillor Martin, you did raise that. I'll follow it up. It naturally, I think, would have gone through Councillor Taylor's committee, but may have slipped through the net, so I'll follow it up with Colin and Tracy. On Freeport, I appreciate that colleagues received the outline business case at relative short notice, and it was a weighty document. I've had some conversations with Councillors Fole and Pringle, but not yet with Councillor Zadrozny or our non-aligned independent members about an interim briefing, because the full business case will come hopefully to the 2nd of December policy committee, but also will be a very complex document, although hopefully building on the OBC, not completely different. Nevertheless, there is a judgment call to be made about whether we publish, even in the exempt papers, the full business case. It's dense, it's complicated, or whether we look at doing some kind of fairly comprehensive public report which sets out as much as we can, given the commercial sensitivity of even the full business case. And I've asked Adrian, who's au fait with all of that and the timetable, to contact Councillor Fole and Councillor Zadrozny, and we'll find a way of getting to our non-aligned independent members as well to sense check that, because in conversation with Kate, and clearly we have more conversations to hold, there was a view that perhaps a more comprehensive public report and not necessarily an exempt full business case would be the better way to deal with a policy committee, but happy to be advised, and Adrian will follow up with those conversations in the next couple of weeks so that we make an informed decision before we publish papers for the 2nd of December.
Thank you very much. It's helpful. Any further comments on the work programme, Dave? And I'll come to you. Dave?
Yeah, cheers. We've done a lot of work on Towton and the HS2 hub. Can we have a review on whether we're going to actually get to Towton? I know they're talking about abandoning the eastern leg, but the policy did deal with the HS2 Towton project.
Yep, so that's on the list in terms of regional economic stuff. We are assuming that the IRP will be very soon, as it has been for a year. But it does generally seem like it's coming to a head, and we'd get an answer to some of those questions formally very soon, at which point we'll bring it back to the next committee. And I would imagine, and certainly would be disappointed if it wasn't in time for the next policy committee to go through that in more detail.
And with the leader's permission, to add to that, if the IRP is published imminently, which we're led to believe it might be, then group leaders will get a briefing separately, because there'll be a gap between publication and policy committee, and of course you're entitled to understand the implications of any announcements. So we'll do briefings and we'll come back with a formal report on the 2nd of December, assuming IRP is published as we expect.
Just to clarify, and Bruce is quite right that we're talking in acronyms, Integrated Rail Plan is the IRP, for those who might not be aware, which we expect to be announced fairly shortly. Lots of conversations have been going on about that for months, and I'm optimistic, but we will see, won't we? And yeah, we'll make sure information is shared as quickly as possible, because if it is good news, it'd be nice for us to be able to celebrate it, wouldn't it, from that point of view? Right, so on that front, I think that draws the work programme to an end. I don't think we need to... Okay, of course, yeah, sorry.
Just one quick one. Going back to the report, I mean, I think, to be honest with you, I think making a decision on the basis of a report the style of the outline business case last time is really, really difficult. I mean, it really does, and I think Anthony's proposal to actually put it into English for us so we can understand it is really, really important. And the complexity of it is just kind of... It's certainly kind of, to some extent, very difficult to comprehend. And on that front, please, can we have it more than a week beforehand for the policy committee? I mean, for us to get it for 4 or 5 days or whatever it is kind of beforehand, and to get to grips with something of that complexity and that importance in terms of decision making for the region. I'm sorry, but it's just unreasonable to ask it of us.
Yeah, thanks, Kate. I mean, in truth, that's not in our hands necessarily, because obviously the Freeport board has to approve it before it comes to us, and they've got their own schedule. But we will. We did last time as soon as we could. But we can certainly probably, if we're going to do something, and to be decided in conversation with opposition leaders. But if we're going to do something that is more of a report as opposed to the full and final detail, then that might be something we could pull together in draft form, if you like, ahead of time, and have that conversation. That might be a way around it. But sure. But in terms of the full and final detail, that's not necessarily within our control. But we'll do whatever we can, and I'll challenge Adrian to come up with something useful from that perspective. All right.
Yeah, just a quick one, really, just to make people aware. They can't say it, so I'm going to say it for them, really. There has been an enormous amount of work being put in by the senior leadership team at the County Council and Ben on our behalf over those 3 issues: Devo, IRP, Integrated Rail Plan, and the Freeports. And I mean an enormous amount of work. It's been extremely impressive, actually, of me, Deputy Leader, watching brief, really, of it going on behind the scenes. So I am telling you, they are to be applauded for all the hard work that they've been putting on our behalf and on behalf of people of Nottinghamshire.
Thank you, Bruce. Appreciate that. Hopefully the proof will be in the pudding when these announcements come out. We will see. Right. So I think that's everybody on. We don't need to vote on the work programme, do we?
We don't vote on
No, that's fine. And right, so we'll move on to item 8, which is just ahead of looking at the exempt appendix for the Housing Decarbonisation Fund. I have to read this lovely sentence, which says, the committee will be invited to resolve that the public be excluded for the remainder of the meeting on the grounds that the discussions are likely to involve disclosure of exempt information described in Schedule 12A of Local Government Act 1972, and the public interest in maintaining the exemption outweighs the public interest in disclosing the information. And if this is agreed, we will turn off the camera, basically. Keith is doing it now. So can I ask for those in favour of moving to the exempt appendix? Most of us. That is carried. Thank you very much.